Good morning, everyone. I just want to confirm that you can hear me. I know I've been having some trouble with my computer, so I just want to confirm that I can be heard and I'm coming through nice and clear.
Yes, you are.
Awesome. Well, good morning. I would like to take the time to welcome you to this morning's workshop. I want to thank you all for joining me today. I know that, we're all gearing up for the holidays, so I hope that y'all are doing really great and you're preparing and things like that. I want to let you all know that my name is Reisha Williams. And I'm from the Office of Sexual Violence Prevention. I'm the Director of Interpersonal Violence for Miami-Dade College. I am not necessarily able to view the chat, so I'm hoping that either April or Lindsay, one of the other wonderful people in this environment, can help me to look through it if there are any issues coming up or if I can't be heard as I go throughout the session. So I just want to thank you all so much for joining me here. I am going to give it a minute before I get started so that we could get my co-presenter set up. So please feel free to just take a minute and settle into the topic, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, so for the essence of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started while my co-presenter gets all logged in and set up. Hopefully she's able to join, but I do just want to keep up with the time. So again, good morning. My name is Reisha. We have quite a bit of information on today's agenda. We're going to do some quick introductions. We're going to talk about defining sexual violence and the impact of sexual violence, how to help, and requirements and resources. So my name, again, is Reisha. I essentially am the Director of Interpersonal Violence Prevention, which means that I essentially work a lot around the prevention and intervention as it relates to sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking at all Miami-Dade College campuses. I really help work with students and employees and things like that. And so please feel free to reach out to our office. It is a great resource. My co-facilitator today is Franchine Peters. She's from Roxcy, Bolton, so I'm hoping she's able to log in and join us for today's presentation. So when she comes in, she would be able to give herself a really short introduction and get started, but I'm just introducing her for the sake of time while she gets logged in. In this virtual environment, it's just one of the many challenges that we can face sometimes trying to get logged into these webinars and get on with the workshop and things like that. But Franchine Peters is the manager at Roxcy Bolton Rape Treatment Center at Jackson Memorial Health, and she works as it is the state certified rape crisis center, and she really works to support victims and survivors of sexual assault, and as well as sexual violence presentations, and really in our community to help. So before we get started with this content, I think it's really, really important to just hone in on a couple of things, right? So as we go throughout the presentation, you'll recognize very quickly that sexual violence impacts a lot of people from a lot of different communities, and in very varying ways, right? So sometimes it can be really harmful, and sometimes it can be something that we've normalized so much so even though it does cause harm, it isn't something that is traumatic to us. However, it's important that we recognize that because of the amount of numbers and what we're going to discuss, that as we go throughout this presentation, it may bring up some things for you, right? It may just be a situation of where we're in this experience and we're hearing about it, and you're hearing definitions and things kind of, relate to you. It may be something you've experienced or something you've heard someone experience. It brings up some feelings for you. And if that is the case, we really want to be sure that you're taking care of yourself and that you're able to really accept the information. So please feel free to excuse yourself and do whatever you need to make yourself feel comfortable in this situation. We just want to make sure that you're in a space where you can really absorb the information, right? And not to cause any harm to you. The other part of this that I really want to hone in on is your role. This workshop is essentially to equip you to be able to support a survivor, or find resources for yourself if you need to, not necessarily to go beyond the scope of, right? So we don't want you to use this information to feel like a therapist. We don't want you to use this information to feel like you have to do any kind of counseling. That's not what it is. It's how you, whether it be as a tutor or as a administrator, as someone who works with students, as a community member, a family member, a friend, how you can help to prevent and respond to sexual violence and sexual harassment in your role, right? So we don't want to encourage you to go beyond the scope of that, but we really want to help create a community and an environment that is safe for all of us to be able to learn and achieve our self-identified goals. Now, before we begin, I know that we come here sometimes thinking about, our roles and what's required and what do I need to do and what's mandated and things like that. However, it is important to also highlight that at the middle of this, there is a survivor, right? So we always want to keep that victim or survivor. You'll hear me use the language interchangeably as I go throughout the presentation, but it means the same thing, just depends on your professional setting. But at the center of this, at the center of whatever the incident is, whether it be sexual harassment or whether it be sexual assault, that there is someone who has been impacted, there is someone who has been affected. So I'm going to try to play this video. Please be sure to let me know if you can hear it. My speaker sound should be on. So let me know if when you see the person speaking, if the audio is coming through clearly.
I remember the night in agonizing detail. I remember the excitement of being in a new city, ready to begin my first year of college.
I just moved into my dorm, and it was strange and warm and comforting to see your familiar face in this foreign environment. I was happy to be with you.
It had become late and I was ready to go to bed. It had been a long day for you too.
You asked if you could sleep in my dorm, given how late it was.
Reluctantly, I agreed.
I remember laying next to you, stone cold, unable to sleep or move.
This is not where I thought the night would lead to. I was afraid.
I didn't know what was happening. I remember thinking,
this is not what I wanted. I remember asking you to stop.
I lay there in silent shock as I let you violate me.
I was supposed to defend myself. I was supposed to kick and scream, but I did nothing.
I was afraid. I convinced myself that this isn't happening. I was helpless.
I tried to stay as busy as possible and do anything I could to not think about it.
I remember being home for Thanksgiving and Christmas break and feeling nothing.
I wasn't excited to see my family. I wasn't hungry.
I cried a lot.
I would cry at least once, sometimes twice a day.
At night, I would cry until the exhaustion gave me peace. That is what you did to me.
I constantly thought about how I could have stopped you.
I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't panicked.
If I had just asked you to leave.
I continue to struggle with this today. I'm still trying to figure out where to go from here and how to deal with what you did to me.
The only thing I know is I will be okay.
I will close these wounds without your permission.
I will talk about it whether you want me to or not.
I will talk about it even though men aren't supposed to get raped.
I will talk until people listen.
Okay, so do you all have any thoughts about that? Any feelings, anything that was surprising to you when you were listening to that account? that bring up anything for you all as you went through? Or I can't see the chat box, so let me know how that was for you.
So someone stated, Reisha, it was definitely an eye-opener.
Okay, so I'm able to log in on my phone, so I just got access. Okay, I see definitely an eye-opener. When they said men aren't supposed to get raped, it really struck me. I think that's one of the things that we really have to start honing in on, right? Regardless of the kind of sexual violence we're talking about, it's really important to acknowledge that we really want to start dispelling this myth of what a victim or a survivor looks like, right? It's not necessarily one of those things that we think about when we think about what does it mean to be a survivor, right? We don't always recognize that, hey, a survivor can be a man, survivors can be women. It impacts everyone of every social economic class, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion equally, right? But sometimes as professionals, as community members, we go into this and we think to ourselves, oh my goodness, a survivor must look this way. A survivor may look like this. And that's definitely not true, right? Anyone can experience sexual assault, and sexual assault can look like various things. So when we start to define the violence, one thing to realize is that at Miami-Dade College, when we talk about sexual misconduct or sexual harassment, we're talking about several different things, right? Current federal Title IX regulations now, when we talk about sexual misconduct as it's labeled at MDC or sexual violence, what we're talking about is several different crimes as well as sexual harassment. So while sexual harassment looks like what we refer to as quid pro quo or tit for tat, or unwelcome sexual advances in any form, right? Whether it be verbal, whether it be unwanted touching, whether it be weird jokes or weird comments that someone's making of a sexual nature, that encompasses sexual harassment. But dating violence is also included in that definition, domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault as well. Now, when we start to define sexual assault is any act, contact, or behavior directed against another person without consent of the victim, including instances where the victim is incapable of giving consent. This includes, but is not limited to, rape, fondling, incest, and statutory rape. Now, in that definition, we see the word consent. And as a community, we think about consent in so many different ways. But what is really consent? What does it mean? It is intelligent, knowing, and voluntary, right? It doesn't include forced submission. So what consent means is essentially you're aware of what you're giving permission for someone to do. You're aware of the actual ramifications of that. So I might be giving you consent to give me a hug, but not consent to give me a kiss. Or a consent to give me a hug in this moment, but not necessarily consent to give me a hug every single day, right? Consent can be taken away at any time, and it's not coerced. So it's not in these situations where someone is trying to manipulate you. Oh, well, everyone gives hugs, everyone gives kisses. This is Miami, this is how it is, right? It's important that we have consent regardless of the culture, because then we lead into a place where we may be seeing, experiencing, or perpetrating sexual assault and doing unwanted acts, unwanted behaviors, or anything like that directed at a person, and they haven't given you that permission, or they haven't given you permission in that time. Those are some important tidbits to think about as we go throughout the presentation. Now, when we talk about domestic violence, you want to think about a crime as a crime that is committed by a specific person or relationship, right? So it can be a current or former spouse or intimate partner, a person who the victim shares a child in common with, a person who is cohabitating with or has cohabitated with the victim as a spouse or intimate partner, or any other person against an adult or youth victim who is protected from that person's actions under the domestic violence and family laws of that jurisdiction. So domestic violence can look like a host of crimes, whether it be physical violence, which is simple assault, or felony assault. It can look like financial abuse, someone taking someone else's money and using it as their own in an intimate relationship, or sometimes domestic violence you will see in a caregiver setting where you have maybe an elderly person who's being cared for by a relative, and that relative caregiver is perpetrating abuse against that person, and different things like that. But we're not necessarily going to get too far into domestic violence and what that is, but it's really good to just have a context around it. You really want to think about it as intimate relationships or familial relationships where someone is using an abusive tactic or using a form of abuse to maintain power and control over another person, right? So it can look like a host of things. Now, when we talk about dating violence, we're talking about violence committed by a person who is or has been in a social relationship of a romantic or intimate nature with the victim. The existence of such relationship shall be determined by the victim with consideration of the length of the relationship, the type of relationship, and the frequency of the interactions between the persons involved. Now, for the purposes of this definition, dating violence includes sexual or physical abuse or threat of that abuse, and it doesn't include anything that is covered in domestic violence. When you think about dating violence, a working definition that I kind of use is I kind of relate it to relationships that have the expectation of intimacy or a romantic nature, but might have been shorter in length. You want to think about a relationship that's lasting at least 6 months or more, and there's some sort of abuse happening within that intimate setting, whether it be verbal abuse, somebody is making threats against someone or threats to harm the other partner, sexual abuse, where someone is not getting consent before sexual actions and is using that as a way to control their partner or manipulate them. And again, you can have that financial economic abuse as well. Now, the one tricky part about this is if something falls within the threshold of domestic violence, it will be counted as domestic violence. Whereas if something does not necessarily fall within the definition of domestic violence, but is still violence in a relationship, it may be considered dating violence. One thing to know about these crimes and how to respond to them is that we use these definitions to kind of guide what is happening, but regardless if there is abuse in an intimate situation or in a family relationship in general, it can be really, really harmful. When we talk about stalking, we're talking about engaging in a course of conduct directed at a person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for his safe or her safety or the safety of others, or to suffer substantial emotional distress, right? When you think about stalking, you really want to think about an ongoing pattern, right? Of someone either, sometimes when we think about stalking, we automatically think about someone following someone, but that someone could be following or monitoring someone using technology, so it doesn't necessarily have to be physical. Stalking can also include someone just popping up and everywhere you are and really tracking you down. And now we know, because we've been in quarantine in a virtual environment, it's a lot easier, unfortunately, during COVID-19 to be able to stalk someone because the places we go is kind of more limited, right? We're engaging in technology, and so we might be sharing more. And so we really want to be very mindful of stalking, especially in this context. So, the impact of violence. Please be sure to let us know if you have any questions in the chat box as we go throughout. I know I kind of worked through those definitions really quickly, but we really just wanted to lay a platform so that we're all on the same page when we start talking about the ways to respond. I want to make sure that Francine is able to log in. Are you there, Francine?
Yeah, yes, I am. Yes, I am. Thank you for having me, everyone. You could go to the next slide as I talk about the impact of violence. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. Reisha?
Yes, we hear you, Francine.
Okay,
Very well.
yes, can you transition to the next slide, please?
Hi, are you?
All right. Okay. So I'll just talk, and then we will see what happens. I think there may be a pause there. But as Risha mentioned, I feel like I'm echoing. Am I echoing?
Yes, I think it's because you have to mute some of the mics.
Okay.
One second.
No problem. Okay. I think I'm better. Okay, so violence impacts not just the individual in which it is occurring to, but it is a societal issue. And so it's really important that support and information is surrounded with sexual assault, domestic violence, and other types of violences. And so today, we just wanted to talk about a little bit of different types of statistics. And so in the next slide, we will talk about just a few. But I just want to emphasize, today that, this is a national problem and it doesn't just happen locally, and that sadly, even here at the Rape Treatment Center we deal with sexual assault survivors daily, and less than 2 minutes every day someone is being sexually assaulted. Among undergrad students, 23.1% of females and 5.4% of males experience rape or sexual assault through physical force, violence, or incapacitation. And that's a very high number. Reports from the 2019 annual crime report in the Miami-Dade County has where 955 offenses of rape and 8,160 offenses of domestic violence. And, to think that these are just a drop in the bucket. Most of these crimes goes unreported. So, that is a jarring reality that we face each day. And, of domestic violence reports, 42% of the offenders are spouses and cohabitants of the victim. And, that's so important because a lot of times there's so many myths out there, and one of those myths is that the motive, especially for sexual assault, is that it's about sex, but really it's about power and control, and there is an intersection there with domestic violence and sexual assault. And a lot of times, because a person's guard is more lower with someone that they know, unfortunately we see the incidences of violence higher with known parties than stranger, that we would see on movies and those types of things. Most sexual assaults are perpetrated, as I stated, by acquaintances, survivors, and not strangers. So, unfortunately, though we do see, movies and certain images in our community of stranger rape, that is on the infrequent spectrum, and sadly it's those that do, and that's why it's very devastating when it does happen, because it is someone that is usually trusted by the victim. The Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, also known as RAIN, estimates that 2 out of 3 rapes go unreported, but the numbers from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, also known as NSVRC, suggests that the rate could be much, much higher. And again, being in this work, you can see that oftentimes, and it really takes a community effort just to remove that stigma of the negative stigma that prevents survivors from coming forward, and believing that survivor when they do come forward is very empowering. On average, nearly 20 persons per minute are sexually abused by an intimate partner. And again, you know, the devastation that happens is astronomical. And you know, that's why we need each person, you know, to be advocates of change, because the impact of sexual violence and domestic violence, it doesn't only impact that individual but their family members, and so much more. You can go to the next slide, please. Some other things, you know, 1 in 6 women and 1 in 17 men experience stalking in their lifetime. Reisha went over the definitions of stalking. And, you know, the unique thing about stalking is that it can be very debilitating. Everyone experiences stalking in a different way. Most times, persons are stalked, again, by people that are known to them. You know, it's just engaging in a course of contact directed at a specific individual. Can you imagine, you know, someone targets you and follows you wherever you're going, you know, to incite fear or a sense of, you know, that harm could come to you. It's, you know, it is very, very scary experience. And, you know, someone shares, you know, that they've been stalked, or they feel like they're being stalked, you know, really providing that support, knowing how to provide resources is key. Knowing that not all stalkers are intimate partners. However, over half of stalking offenders are current or former intimate partners. And, you know, we can see this sometimes where situations may go awry in a relationship. And, you know, we hear the famous line, if I can't have you, no one else can have you. So then the stalking continues. And sometimes it can either lead to violence or fatality in some instances. 52.5% of current and former intimate partners, breaking down to acquaintance, stranger, family members, and persons of authority. And again, you know, the stranger statistics is 16%, but the others are known again by the survivor, again making the impact very devastating. You can go to the next slide. Pardon. Research shows that that there's an estimated cost for rape between $87,000 and 776,000. And, you know, these costs come in a myriad of ways: legal proceedings, you know, hiring lawyers, you know, going through depositions, the health cost of the exam, prophylactic medication, specialized care, and then also parent planning if needed. You know, decreased productivity, missed days at work, pardon, and so many things, you know, whether you miss days of work or you have to leave because you cannot function. You know, we've had various calls here in the center where persons may have been going on well, and then all of a sudden here's a trigger that happens, and then all of a sudden they can no longer function in their role at work. And so we had to get that person in and get into therapy, you know. Also, there is a stigma, you know, with who a sexual assault survivor looks like. Persons within the LGBTQ plus community often experience similar or higher rates of intimate partner violence or sexual violence, and students who experience sexual assault are more likely to drop out of school. And that's why it's so important that there is support, especially when a student comes forward saying that they've been sexually assaulted, to provide that support, because they could be in class with the perpetrator or living in a dorm room or so many things, you know. So providing that safety mechanism will also help that student feel safe on campus and not, you know, forego their education due to their assault. Next slide, please. Emotional response and thoughts of sexual assault victims. There could be, it's so important that we realize that no person has the same affect. No one will have the same, response to their sexual assault. And so one of the things is knowing that it will vary from individuals to individuals. Some responses can include anger, anxiety, guilt, shame, disgust, self-blame. Also, common thoughts are confused, having flashbacks. And these flashbacks could come at any time. I just spoke about different triggers. It could be a smell, it could be a sound, it could be a place, questioning if they deserved the assault and wondering if they will be blamed by others. And one of the huge things that we at various sexual assault centers say is start by believing the survivor, because it is so important and so empowering when you do that, because even if that survivor went to an event and drank something, one drink, and then all of a sudden something happened to them because someone may have put some substances in that drink, the survivor could say, oh my God, if I didn't just drink this, but, or if I didn't go to the grocery store, if I didn't do this, but, no one wakes up expecting or saying that they were planning to be assaulted today. And so it's so important that we also, validate that they are feeling this way, but letting them know that, it is not their fault what happened to them. Different responses are not crazy. It's normal. Our bodies go into various things in order to protect us. And, sometimes the trauma doesn't happen immediately, but it could happen at a later time. So it's so important to realize that there's no right or wrong way of how a survivor feels after the assault, but it's just making sure that we're there to support them. Physical impacts, it could involve broken bones, brain injuries, ulcers, gastrointestinal issues, STD, STIs, unwanted pregnancies, bruises, cuttings, scrapes, etc. And again, it depends on the type of assault. We've seen persons incapacitated, having to be on a machine, or some being able to walk away from their injuries, and unfortunately some expire due to their injuries. So it is a wide range of effects that can happen. There's also psychological effects that occurs, sadness, loss, despair, depression, loneliness, shame, isolation, guilt, confusion, substance abuse, loss of self, insecurities can happen, suicidal ideations, fear, anxiety, fear, and terror are all things that a survivor can experience. And so it's so important that we do believe. And trauma affects survivors in different ways. It can affect their willingness to reach out and to engage, their ability to mobilize, the mobilization of resources, decision making could be affected, responses to advocacy and support. Some survivors may not want support, or maybe not ready. Responses to law enforcement, testimony, giving up their testimony, sharing their experiences. The legal process can be lengthy, so there could be different emotional tolls that can also take. Also, there could be appearance and demeanor change after one has experienced trauma as well. And so we'll go into how to help, and I'll turn it back over. How to help. Oh, that's still me. What to do if you have been sexually assaulted. That is so important because, again, every 2 minutes, rounding up, someone is sexually assaulted. So if someone is sexually assaulted, it's important to get into a safe place away from the perpetrator as soon as possible, calling the local rape crisis center, such as RTC or wherever that survivor is. victim service agency to obtain information, seeking medical attention. Forensic exams are done by specialized trained nurses in the emergency room and are free for victims of sexual assault, especially here at RTC, and consider reporting to the law enforcement. Survivors do not have to report to law enforcement here at RTC to access services. It's also important to listen, being compassionate. If someone discloses an assault to you, it means that that person is investing or indicating trust in you. So don't violate that trust, being present, paying attention, of being what's being said. Consider what you can do to support the person. Again, believe, rather than asking lots of questions, just let that person know that you believe him or her and are willing to support them as best as you can, giving options of where they can go. Allow the person to carefully choose what option is best for them. That is so key. And taking care of yourself, because hearing about someone's trauma can also cause a secondary trauma to yourself. So being able to take care of yourself, getting some self-care in, because what you hear could also be traumatic for you as well. Your support matters. Reisha? I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I got cut off there.
Yeah, I think you might have, Francie. You could just pick it back up.
I'm so sorry. Yes.
No
So
problem.
it's so important also that we are able to check in. If someone shares that they
Hello, are you guys getting feedback?
Yes.
yes. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Are you all able to see my screen clearly and everything? I think it cut off.
Yeah, we can see the screen clearly.
Yes,
Okay.
perfect. I'm so sorry. Yes, technology it's so wonderful. Yes, so it's so important when somebody shares with you that they have been sexually assaulted or experienced some sort of trauma. It's important to lend your support. It's important to check in with that person to see what's coming up, and when checking in, it's important that we kind of analyze ourselves as well, to remove any biases that we may have regarding situations. When we are, when somebody has said that they've been sexually assaulted or we're checking in with them to see how they're doing, we have to kind of flush out all of our past experiences, our values, and our biases, because if someone says, oh, I drank this, and then they told you that they were sexually assaulted, and if you felt like, well, you shouldn't have been drinking that, or you shouldn't have been wearing this, or you shouldn't have been doing all of that, that's not helpful. That's not helpful in the situation. That's not being supportive of the survivor. And then also checking in with yourself. If you have been a victim of childhood sexual trauma or some other trauma, and you're not in the space to provide supportive help at that time, being able to realize that within yourself is so key, because you can also be victimized and traumatize that individual, and so that is so huge. And a lot of times triggers again come in different ways. So you could be triggered just by hearing someone and then realizing that, but just maybe being helpful to have that resource pamphlet handy if you're not able to verbalize because you're being triggered at that time is so key. And then also, it's also important that we use supportive language instead of victim blaming language, like, well, you know, if you didn't wear that skirt, or, you know, well, you were hanging out with him a lot, or something like that. But instead, saying, you know, no one deserves this. You know, this is not your fault. I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm here to support you. Just let me know what you need. Would you like information about resources? And then also being able to have those resources on hand. You know, again, victim blaming language. Sometimes we don't even know we do it because we are in such a critical world. Sometimes we use these languages, you know, I would have, oh, if only they refused to, you know, they should have, why didn't you? X, Y, and Z. You know, other people have done this if they were in your situation. Again, these kind of verbiage is not helpful. It only causes someone to plummet further into distress, emotional distress, and we don't want that. We want to be able to help that person along. So we just want to really emphasize that. Wonderful. You know, okay. Okay. I'll turn over this rest of this part to Reisha.
Awesome. So while we wait for Reisha to join back in, just some really good points that were made in the chat. As we can see, Emily said, recognizing that their experience is valid no matter what it sounds like. Yes, that's very important.
Yes, yes, it is. And, you know, we don't really understand the importance of validating one's feelings. You know, can we remember a time when we felt validated? We shared something hard with someone and they're like, oh, wow, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Oh my goodness, I can only imagine what this must feel like for you. And the weight that fell off of you just hearing that, because you were bracing yourself to be judged, but instead you felt emboldened and supported. And that's what we want to do for survivors, because, you know, when you think about it, we're in a victim blaming society. And for you to be able to give that support is very powerful.
Hi, are you all able to hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I'm so sorry. I don't know why my computer keeps cutting out. So in our last few minutes, I did want to just skip ahead and see if you all had any questions that you wanted to ask us, or any scenarios you wanted to go through. I think we've talked a lot about sexual assault and things like that. And so if you all have any questions that we can answer, we really want to make sure that we're meeting the need, because we do have a lot of information. So you can always go back and look at the slides, but we want to make sure that y'all don't have any questions about anything we've mentioned, or about possible scenarios that may come up for you all. I know that we have one, but I think it might be helpful to just kind of quickly talk through what it might look like. Does anybody have any questions or scenarios or things they may want to wonder how to respond to? As we wait for folks to type, I just wanted to mention too, I think as tutors, one of the scenarios that often happens, especially within that setting, can look like sexual harassment, right? So sometimes we have these situations where it's not necessarily assault, but it is unwanted gestures or jokes that are being made. I know that in one of the case studies that we discussed, what we really look at is kind of flirtation, right? And so sometimes we can confuse flirting and actual sexual harassment, which is a big thing. I think that especially in the roles that we work in, sometimes because as tutors or just as advocates in general, you get, or people who work with students, students or advocate on the behalf of students in general, you may end up in situations or circumstances where you find that you're getting some inappropriate jokes. Maybe something that started off as a fun and playful comment about your outfit starts to get sexual in some way, and that's not necessarily at all what we want. And you don't know how to navigate that sometimes, right? And so what might happen, or what this might look like, is someone saying that, you know, making a weird joke or saying that they want to date you, and after, as a tutor, you say, no, I'm not necessarily okay with that. They keep making that joke. And I want you all to know that oftentimes those are things that you don't have to deal with, and at MDC we don't tolerate. And I'm sure at any school that you're coming from, that you don't necessarily have to tolerate. Whether it be you making some jokes, you always want to be very careful about that, because as you can see, with the rates of sexual assault looking at like 1 in 4, and we're looking at 1 in 5 or 1 in 6, right? Sometimes you never know what someone has experienced. And so maybe putting them in these positions sometimes can, or making a joke or saying a comment you think is funny about their appearance, or about maybe it might be a little flirtatious, maybe unwanted. So we really want to check in with people and make sure that we're getting their consent, or they're okay with the language that we're using in a way that isn't harmful, in a way that doesn't use our authority. I see a comment that says, sometimes the syllabus doesn't indicate trigger warnings for sensitive, controversial course material, and I know as a student, friend, and tutor, I've witnessed negative effects. Yeah, that's a really great point. Sometimes we don't have content warnings or trigger warnings, and that can bring up a lot of feelings for folks. I see a comment that says, a challenge in our roles is often we only get bits and pieces of what occurred and we weren't sure how to help. Well, one of the things we want to point you to is the fact that as a member of our campus community, you are always invited to or welcome to call campus public safety and say, hey, I heard of this situation. I'm not sure if it's something that is reportable, or something that, you know, is big deal, but I did want to go through it with someone. Now, of course, you always want to talk to that student and say, hey, is this something you would like to call public safety with me with? Or, hey, is this something that you want to report happening online, or you want to talk to someone about? You can always direct them to my office to speak with someone. You can always reach out to my office to speak to someone. And you can always reach out to campus public safety, usually having a little bit of a conversation beforehand to get some support, right? So there are resources out there if you're just not sure. Your only responsibility is if it's a good faith attempt and you really want to be supportive, or if you have a question, you know, you can reach out to someone. You can always reach out to your supervisor, who's going to follow a certain chain of command as well, because we are federally required to provide a safe campus community, right? And it says, and the student has a hard time writing the assignment based on the topic at hand. And I think that is a good point. That's a great point. And I think that as a tutor, sometimes you do have the ability to advocate and say, hey, if this feels harmful to you, if this feels not okay to you, you know, you may want to reach out to your supervisor or talk to them about it. You may want to reach out to my office and say, hey, I have a student, and make sure it's okay with the student before you pass on their information. But hey, I have a student, things are coming up for them with this assignment. So we make sure we're not doing activities, doing tasks, making statements, or doing behaviors that can continue to re-traumatize someone. It says another thing that comes to mind is the fact that we have dual enrollment high schoolers, so there needs to be a sensitivity to their age and appropriate interaction. That is a really, really great point. I think as a best practice, I usually recommend that people who are working with students make sure that they maintain a certain amount of space, right? Like if we were in a physical space, we make sure we give people their personal space, so we're not violating boundaries that we may not know about, or we're not making content about flirting or flirtatiousness. Especially because when we're talking about dual enrollment students, we're talking about students who may be under the age of 18. And that makes it a mandated reporting situation, because then we may be talking about child abuse. I see someone wanting to share, and I just do want to caution you. I know we probably have a minute left. This chat is being recorded, and this information is being recorded. So please note that while you're sharing anything, but I do welcome and invite that as well. Anonymous tips, usually if you have an anonymous tip or if you have something that you would like to report anonymously, you can feel free to do so. On MDC's public safety website, there is called an anonymous reporting form, and there's also a silent witness form that you can fill out and just give us information, right? You don't have to tell us the student's name. If you just want us to know, hey, this thing is happening on this campus, so that we can all be a part in keeping our campus safe, right? So that we can all play a role in keeping our community and our environment safe. And I think that's what it's about, right? That's what Franchine is talking about, support, and just making sure that we're supporting students, but also supporting ourselves if we are experiencing this, if we're experiencing jokes or unwanted language or unwanted touching, right? That we are making sure that we're getting resources for ourselves, and we know that there's support there for you as well as for the students. So
Awesome.
I think that is our time. I really do just want to thank you all so much for bearing with us through our challenges and really working with us throughout this session. If you do have any questions or you want more information, you can feel free to reach out to myself or to Franchine as well. Here's our contact information. Please feel free to contact us. I will turn it back over to April with that.
Thank you all. This was a lot of great information. It was a lot to condense in the short time period that we had. But again, please look at the slides. You have the contact information that will be in the slides. And when you have a moment, go ahead and rate this session as we have the link there. And have a great day, guys. Enjoy the rest of the symposium and let us know if you have any questions. And of course, thank you, Franchine and Reisha.
Thank you.